Let's discuss the Celsius-Mercia's model of communicative competence. Celsius-Mercia et al. Proposed that since Canale and Swans created the model of communicative competence, the specific model to deal with communicative language teaching is missing. So the previous model, which was the communicative competence model introduced by Canale and Swan, according to Celsius-Mercia et al., it lacked the understanding of or the aspect of communicative language teaching, which they feel is very important if any communicative competence model has to be used. Now, the Bachmann's model was criticized based on the following two arguments. One is that it is viewed as mere tools for language testing, that Bachmann's model was nothing but simple a vehicle or a device to be used for language testing only. And second, it lacks content base for syllabus design. So in terms of pedagogical aspect of language communication, Bachmann's CLA was criticized that first it seemed that it was just considered as language testing tool, and secondly, the content for syllabus design was not taken care of. Celsius-Mercia et al. Proposed the communicative competence model, which represents an elaboration of the previous, and here we see that discourse is the focus of the attention or takes the central role among all the competencies introduced in the previous models. We had already discussed these two in our previous model, and we have also tried to understand the model proposed by Celsius-Mercia. Here we will be presenting a little different understanding or explanation of the model, that this model consists of 5 components: discourse competence, actional competence, then you have strategic competence, social linguistics competence, and linguistic competence. Now, discourse competence is conceptualized as a separate competence here, this one. It has been used as a separate one. Actional competence is introduced for the first time, means the knowledge required to understand communicative intent or intention by performing and interpreting speech acts and speech act sets. So it is viewed as the knowledge of speech acts needed, number 1, for engaging in interpersonal exchange, and number 2, to impart information, and number 3, to express information and feelings. So these constitute speech acts or speech act sets. Then we see that discourse, which is presented here separately, basically takes into account cohesion and coherence, which was separated by Bachmann and Palmer. Like Bachmann and Palmer, there is no discussion of topical knowledge or effective factors under discourse competence. Then we see grammatical competence is called linguistic competence, as according to Celsius-Mercia, it will encompass all components of language, including syntax, morphology, phonology, and sentence structure. Then you have strategic competence. Unlike Bachmann and Palmer, focuses on set of skills. Basically here, the emphasis on the set of skills for overcoming communication problems or deficiencies. According to Celsius-Mercia, the interaction of all these competencies take place in strategic competence. So basically, it is strategic competence which takes into account all the competencies, and moreover, the model contains both the knowledge and ability for use component elaborated by Himes in their also previous models. Celsius-Mercia's revised model was introduced, and Celsius-Mercia asserts that from CLT, communicative language teaching perspective, the previous models did not provide enough elaboration. So therefore, there was a need to bring about modification, and based on that understanding they introduced their second model, which consists of 6 components: sociocultural competence, discourse competence, interactional competence, linguistics competence, formulaic competence, and strategic competence. So in your image you can see this figure where you have sociocultural competence at the top, and then discourse competence in the center, and then you have interactional competence, linguistic competence, and formulaic competence constituting or forming all the corners, and then you have strategic competence somewhere here. Now, sociocultural competence refers to pragmatic knowledge of the speaker and is given the top-down role in this model, as you can see there. Now, according to them, socio-contextual factors takes into account the participants' age, gender, status, social distance, and their relations to each other. The stylistic appropriateness, which refers to politeness, strategies, sense of genres and register. And third important point as far as sociocultural competence is concerned is the cultural factors. That means the background knowledge of the target language group and major dialects and regional differences. Then we have discourse competence, which has been given a central role to this competence, and that is why they believe that all the other competences, they work in integration with the discourse competence. It consists of coherence, which is overt grammatical and lexical connectors; deixis, which are basically situational grounding achieved through personal pronouns, her, here, there, this, that, before, after; coherence, which is to do with the covert link in the discourse; generic structure, which is formal schemata that allows the user to identify an oral discourse segment as conversation, narrative, interview, and all that. Then we have linguistic competence, consists of 4 types of knowledge: phonological, lexical, morphological, and syntactic. Another competence which has been introduced here is formulaic competence, refers to those fixed and prefabricated chunks of language that speakers use heavily in everyday interaction, such as of course, all of a sudden, how do you know, I'm fine, thanks, how are you, spend money, mutually, or some idioms: to kick the bucket, to die for, to get the axe, to be fired, or something like lexical frames such as I'm looking for, see you, and things like that. So basically they are fixed and prefabricated chunks of language used every day. Then we have interactional competence, and it has subcompetence such as actional, conversational, and nonverbal competence. In terms of actional, we see that is the knowledge of how to perform common speech acts. And conversational consists of skills like opening and closing conversation, taking turns, changing topics. Non-verbal and verbal communication or competence includes the clansenic behavior, proxemics, habitic behavior, and non-linguistic utterances with interactional importance. Then we have strategic competence, which has the cognitive, metacognitive, memory-related competencies. So the mental processes and all the information about different use of languages and their cognition, memory-related short-term, long-term memory-related competence, all this comes in the strategic competence when you are dealing with a situation when there is a breakdown of any intended expression. To conclude, Celsi-Messias models attempt to explain the specific component of communicative competence. However, the 2007 model of communicative competence elaborated by Celsi-Messias covers almost all the aspects needed for effective communication and clearly establishes and justifies the relationship between and among the identified components of the model.